Megan Mason, and I'm an Adult Services Program Specialist for the Bureau for Children and Families, West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources. So today's presentation will focus on defining terms in adult protective services, understanding the various duties of adult services, understanding and complying with mandated reporting laws, identifying warning signs of adult maltreatment, and connecting with resources. Before we get into the depths of adult protective services, let me first briefly identify the adult services programs and mandate. Adult protective services has its own section of code. West Virginia Code, Chapter 9, Article 6, titled Social Services for Adults. All of our mandates for APS can be found there, and our programs are identified throughout policy, which can be found on the Bureau for Children and Families website. Adult Protective Services does not have a federal mandate, as there are no federal laws governing what and how APS should function. Each state has different eligibility criteria, functions, definitions, and organizational differences. Before we proceed into mandated reporting, let's first briefly identify all programs available within adult services in West Virginia. Those programs are Adult Protective Services, Preventative Adult Protective Services, Homeless Services, Adult Residential Services, Unclaimed Adult Deceased Body, which is when the medical examiner or law enforcement or anyone else makes a referral stating that they have found a deceased adult and no one is claiming those remains. The adult services worker then claims remains and determines what is to be done with that deceased remains. And then we have a substitute decision maker, where we act as a healthcare surrogate or a legal decision maker. So now we're going to go right into mandated reporting. We're going to talk about child and adult protective services. So the similarities in CPS and APS include mandated reporters of medical, dental, and mental health professionals, Christian Science practitioners, religious healers, social service workers, law enforcement, and humane officers. All those professions are similar for mandated reporting for both child abuse and neglect and adult abuse and neglect. Now, mandated reporting differences include, for CPS, in addition to the similarities, these additional professionals are also mandated reporters for CPS. School personnel, including teachers, child care or foster care workers, emergency medical services personnel, members of the clergy, circuit court judges, family court judges and magistrates, employees of the Division of Juvenile Services, youth camp administrator or counselor, employee, coach, or volunteer of an entity that provides organized activities for children, and commercial film or photographic print processor. As for adult protective services, these professionals also have to report by law, state and regional ombudsman, and any employee of a nursing home or residential facility. Now, there is an asterisk next to ombudsman because both the Federal Older Americans Act 42 U.S.C. 3058G D2B and the state long-term care ombudsman program rule prohibit the disclosure of resident identifying information without the resident's consent. These federal directives preclude mandated reporting of suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation, which discloses such information. However, this does not mean that the ombudsman have no role in reporting suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation. That an ombudsman may engage in various responses, including reporting, provided that those responses are consistent with the victim's directives. For more information, contact Suzanne Messenger, the current state long-term care ombudsman representative, at 304-816-3151. So, actually reporting maltreatment. Any individual may report known or suspected cases of abuse and neglect of a child and an incapacitated adult and financial exploitation or an emergency situation involving an incapacitated adult. West Virginia Code, Chapter 49, Article 2, Section 803, and West Virginia Code, Chapter 9, Article 6, Section 9, state if any mandated reporter has reasonable cause to suspect or believe, or if such person observes a child or an adult as a victim of abuse or neglect, including sexual abuse or sexual assault of a child, and financial exploitation or an emergency situation of adult, the mandated reporter is to make a referral immediately to centralized intake, regardless of an employer's policies or procedures. You can make the referral by calling West Virginia Centralized Intake at 1-800-352-6513. And that hotline is available 24/7. So for Child Protective Services, mandated reporters are to report not immediately, not more than 24 hours to centralized intake, and to make additional reports when appropriate to law enforcement and state police, medical examiner or coroner in case of a death, and person in charge of an institution, school, facility, or designee agent thereof. For Adult Protective Services, a mandated reporter is to make a referral to centralized intake, to follow up with a written report within 48 hours to the county DHR office using the APS mandatory reporting form, as well as making any additional reports when appropriate. Those are to go to the county law enforcement and prosecuting attorney, medical examiner or coroner in case of death, administrator of facility, Office of Health Facility Licensure and Certification, Ombudsman, and the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. For Adult Protective Services, the APS mandatory reporting form is this on your screen. When making a referral, you can request a referral number and identify the date the referral is made to centralized intake. For carbon copies of the form, you can request forms with the West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources and Materials Management, which is identified on the bottom right hand of your screen or on the back of the form. This form is in the DHR Bureau for Medical Services Incident Management System. The provider simply clicks on the form and the information is automatically populated from the incident report. Although, be sure to review and fill in the blanks before printing and submitting. You can access a PDF copy of a blank form on the Bureau for Children and Families website. So, what do you do, or what can you expect after making a referral to centralized intake for Adult Protective Services or Child Protective Services? As a mandated reporter, ensure that you tell centralized intake that you're a mandated reporter so that you can receive notifications regarding the referral and investigation. West Virginia Code, Chapter 9, Article 6, Section 9D, and West Virginia Code, Chapter 49, Article 2, Section 804, requires that the DHR notify the mandated reporter whether an investigation into the reporter's suspected abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation has been initiated, and when the investigation is completed. Therefore, you can expect to receive a letter in the mail identifying if the referral that you made as a mandated reporter has been accepted or screened out. If the referral has been accepted, you should receive a letter at the end of the investigation informing you the outcome of the investigation, whether it has been substantiated or if it has not. So now we're going to move into specifically Adult Protective Services. But first, let's review a brief video overviewing Adult Protective Services.
Could you provide an overview of what Adult Protective Services actually does?
Yes, Adult Protective Services will get a referral for abuse, neglect, financial exploitation. In some states, they even investigate reports of self-neglect. The basic things that APS is looking for is they're looking at my capacity, mental capacity. Do I appear to have the ability to give informed consent? If I'm dependent, in what way am I dependent? Do I need help with activities of daily living, independent activities of daily living? What is it that I can do for myself that I can't do for myself? And as important, for those things that I can't do for myself, am I able to manage that? Am I able to get someone to help me? And then they're looking to substantiate whether abuse, neglect, or exploitation happened. So in that whole package, they're looking at capacity, dependency, and they're looking to investigate abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation.
Is there an adult protective services in every state?
Yes, there is, in all 50 states.
And is that governed by state or federal law?
State laws, and it varies, and that's the interesting thing with adult protective services. There isn't a federal mandate similar to what people are used to with child protective services, for example, where definitions are the same and a lot of data collection. So that's why I would encourage people, no matter what state you're in, is to take a look at the Adult Protective Services Act or the enabling legislation to look at that. It varies. It varies on who they investigate. Some, for example, are 18 and older, because it's based on incapacity and dependency, and some are based on age, and some of it is 60 or 65.
Adult Protective Services receives referrals from the community, and anybody in the community can make a referral. Adult Protective Service workers go out in the field and they investigate the client in their environment, the environment where they're being abused. So they go out to determine whether abuse is indeed occurring, and that can be through interviewing the person who's allegedly abused, any person in that person's surrounding, neighbors, friends, relatives, doctors. So the interview and the investigation is quite extensive. We work with law enforcement to help investigate this because there's a social service perspective and there's a law enforcement perspective, but we work collaboratively to investigate these allegations. There are clients who have capacity and those are clients who don't have capacity. If you're determined to have capacity, you have the right to self-determination, which means you can make a decision that people don't agree with. But when you don't have capacity, that's where it changes a bit, because then we may have to go for a more restrictive intervention, which means we might even have to go to court for guardianship if we feel like you're making bad decisions based on your capacity issues.
I often hear what appears to me to be a confusion between a law enforcement investigation and an adult protective services investigation. And it sounds like they're two different things. Can you describe some of those differences?
Yes, adult protective services is a social work perspective in some jurisdictions where we go out to see socially what's going on. We are not there to prove abuse. We're not there to determine whether somebody has broken the law, but we're going there to determine whether or not someone has a social service need.
Well, the police would look into whether a crime has occurred. So that's our role. And if a crime's occurred, like I said, investigate it and pursue it. While the SHS, or Adult Protective Services, their role is more of a civil investigation. So it would be, for example, if a vulnerable adult has a caregiver and that caregiver has not fulfilled their obligations or is neglecting or abusing the vulnerable adult, then they would have their own civil administrative hearings to try and maybe remove this caregiver. And their track is a civil track, and our track as police is a criminal, whether we are going to have a criminal case or not.
We need to do a better job about what we think abuse and neglect and exploitation might be. It may be in an Adult Protective Services statute, but it certainly might not be in the criminal statute. Law enforcement is asking us, what's the crime? Tell me, I'll investigate. And APS is saying, well, this person's been abused, investigate and prosecute, when maybe that doesn't even go together. So there is a difference. We need to tie Adult Protective Services and that investigation of whether I have capacity and whether I've been abused and neglected to what are those criminal statutes that our partners in law enforcement can help us come in and gather evidence and prosecute. So on one side, we may be in an APS situation where the person may not have been abused or neglected and needs help. That to me is a different kind of case, providing resources, offering a case plan, hooking the person up with family members if they want to, allowing that senior to make the decisions and drive that process, as opposed to a crime has been committed, regardless of age, even for those of us who are older, and law enforcement is going to investigate that and see if it's prosecutable.
What about victims who say, I don't want your help, I'm refusing any services? What can you do in a situation like that?
If an APS caseworker goes out and someone says, no, that's exactly what I'm going to say when you come to my house. I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed, don't want to lose my independence. I want to stay in my own home, but I don't know how I got in this trouble and I don't know how to get out. But the last thing I'm going to do is tell you about it. So if an older victim says no to me, I make sure to explain who I am, make sure that I can, to the extent possible, even through the screen door if I have to, what it is that the services that I provide. And I try at the same time to talk about what I can and can't do. The person may tell me to go away. The person say that I'm going to come back. That's fine. I leave my card, and I may come back at a different time of day. If this was the morning, I may come back in the afternoon. I would have tried to get some information. But we need to have rapport, and as well-intentioned as you and I are, or any of us are, dealing with any victim, but especially an older victim, we're a stranger. They don't know us. And especially if we know the dynamics of elder abuse, where the vast majority of the perpetrators are family members or loved ones, they've already been taken advantage by someone that they would never dream would do that. So a stranger comes to the door and says, I'm from the state and I'm here to help. I'm not going to believe it. It's going to take a little rapport building. At the same time, I'm also going to try to find out how that person was tied to the community, to family, or other agencies, because that might be the way to get in as well.
How about someone that appears to have some sort of cognitive impairment? What can a social worker who is trying to initiate contact with that sort of person do in those circumstances?
The Adult Protective Services caseworker, unless they have training beyond what's normally trained, they can only do a beginning assessment of capacity. They can take a look at the person and seeing how they're acting, knowing that there may be medical problems and not psychiatric problems that present in the same way. I'm not eating, I'm not drinking, I'm not taking my meds. May look as though the same as I have a dementia or Alzheimer's or some other disability. What the APS worker can do is, in most states, and once again check with your individual state programs, is we can try to have a psychologist do a home visit and to begin that assessment. In the end, if the person lacks capacity, and the APS caseworker feels as though the person is in real danger, our eyes and our nose tell us that the person is in danger. They're presenting in a way that's far outside the normal spectrum or confusion that you and I would have after a medical procedure or being in a hospital for a while. Then we may take a look at working with the courts, probate courts, may take a look at trying to get a psychiatric assessment of the person, maybe even working with their primary physician. But Adult Protective Services is charged with doing that initial assessment that may lead us down different roads that are determined by policy and procedure.
Please note at the end of the video that it's stated not all services are equal across the nation for Adult Protective Services, and this is true. So be sure to consult West Virginia's laws and policies on Adult Protective Services to understand what services can be provided. So Adult Protective Services in Adult Protective Services in West Virginia. What do? We investigate abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation or emergency situations for our incapacitated adults in the state of West Virginia. Those who are 18 years of age or emancipated minor, which is a child over the age of 16 who has been emancipated by order of the court based on a determination that the child can provide for his or her physical and financial well-being and has the ability to make decisions for him or herself, or marriage of the child. An emancipated minor has all the privileges, rights, and duties of an adult, including the right to contract. Those who are incapacitated or facility resident, and those who are reported to be a victim of abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation, or an emergency situation, are all eligible for Adult Protective Services in West Virginia. So now we're going to move on to definitions in the law and the policy. We're going to start with two policy definitions. First being Adult Protective Services. APS is defined as specific intervention activities designed to protect incapacitated adults or facility residents from abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation resulting in the neglect by others and from self-neglect. Preventative adult protective services is defined as a range of supportive services provided to incapacitated adults or facility residents from whom the threat of harm exists, and without intervention, it is likely that abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation will result. Some legal definitions include incapacitated, which is any person who by reason of physical, mental, or other infirmity is unable to physically carry on the daily activities of life necessary to sustaining life and reasonable health. The key in this definition is that an incapacitated adult is physical or mental. So you can have a physical disability or a mental disability or both and be eligible for adult protective services as an incapacitated adult. So incapacitated versus incompetent. Who determines it? How is it determined? And what is the adult services role? First, let's say that incapacitated equals vulnerable equals disability equals impairment. The impairment does not need to be documented in a medical or Social Security Administration record. It can be simply observed. Incapacity is determined by a licensed physician, psychologist, or nurse practitioner for medical decision making. A healthcare surrogate or medical power of attorney, if one was previously established, is appointed. Whereas incompetency is determined by the court and a guardian and or conservator is appointed. If the adult services worker observes or learns that a vulnerable adult is unable to understand the consequences of their decisions or actions, the worker must obtain a capacity evaluation, either by a licensed physician, psychologist, or nurse practitioner. That professional can appoint a healthcare surrogate while the adult services worker petitions the county magistrate court for a guardian and or conservator if deemed appropriate. The DHR must be the last option to be appointed. A few more legal definitions that are important for adult protective services is abuse. The definition is defined as the infliction of or threat to inflict physical pain or injury on or the imprisonment of any incapacitated adult or facility resident. Neglect is defined by the unreasonable failure by a caregiver to provide the care necessary to assure the physical safety or health of an incapacitated adult or facility resident. It is important to note that this definition was slightly modified in legislative session in 2018 with House Bill 4279. This definition went into effect June 4th, 2018. Self-neglect is actually a policy definition and is defined as the inability of an incapacitated adult to meet his or her own basic needs of daily living due to a mental or physical incapacity. Basic needs, also a policy definition, is defined as the essential requirements necessary to sustain life, health, and well-being such as food, clothing, shelter, and necessary medical care. Caregiver is also a legal definition, as defined as a person or entity who cares for or shares in the responsibility for the care of an incapacitated adult on a full-time or temporary basis, regardless of whether such person or entity has been designated as a guardian or custodian of the incapacitated adult by any contract, agreement, or legal procedures. Caregiver includes healthcare providers, family members, and any person who otherwise voluntarily accepts a supervisory role towards any incapacitated adult. Now there is an asterisk next to the word entity, right here in the definition, because in the definition of neglect, the word caregiver, right here, is used. It means that a facility can be found guilty or can be found to be in the definition of caregiver, there is the word entity, definition of neglect, there is the word caregiver. Due to the language of a person or entity, an entity can be a facility. Thus, a facility can be identified as an alleged perpetrator of neglect only. They cannot be identified as an alleged perpetrator of abuse due to the lack of the word caregiver in the definition of abuse. For example, a facility cannot go into a resident's room and slap them, but the facility can neglect to appropriately staff for the amount of residents. Another key definition for adult protective services is financial exploitation, which is a relatively new definition thanks to House Bill 4279 in legislative session 2018. The definition went into effect June 4th, 2018. The definition is intentional misappropriation or misuse of funds or assets of an incapacitated adult or facility resident, but does not apply to a transaction or disposition of funds or assets where a person made a good faith effort to assist the incapacitated adult or facility resident with the management of his or her money or other things of value. When there are allegations of financial exploitation, there is almost always neglect or abuse occurring simultaneously. So be sure to when you make a referral, to provide as much information as possible. Another important definition is emergency or emergency situation. It is defined as a situation or a set of circumstances which presents a substantial and immediate risk of death or serious injury to an incapacitated adult. When you suspect an emergency situation, call emergency medical services or 911 first, and then call centralized intake to make a referral. Since an emergency situation is an immediate risk of death or serious injury, most likely emergency services are required. This is to ensure the immediate safety of the alleged victim. So now we're going to move on to timeframes within adult protective services. When you make a referral, centralized intake has referral response options, which are immediate from 0 to 2 hours. This is when an emergency situation exists. A face-to-face contact with the alleged victim must be made within 2 hours. There's also within 72 hours, which is when an emergency situation does not currently exist, but the circumstances are severe enough that without prompt intervention, an emergency situation could result. Face-to-face contact with the alleged victim must be made within 72 hours. Then the final referral response option is within 14 days. This is when an emergency situation does not currently exist and or is not expected to develop without immediate intervention. Face-to-face contact with the alleged victim must be made within 14 days. For investigations, once a referral is accepted and being investigated, abuse and neglect referrals have 30 days, and financial exploitation have 60 days to come to a resolution. However, there are policy exemptions that will allow the investigation to go longer than the identified 30 or 60 days. When the referral is accepted, has been investigated, and opens up to a case, an adult protective service case can be open for 12 months, and a preventative adult protective services case can be open for 6 months. Again, there are policy exemptions that can make this last a little bit longer if necessary. So, Adult Protective Services Authority. Adult Protective Services has the authority to investigate allegations in state and private long-term care and assisted living facilities, state-operated mental health facilities, service agencies such as sheltered workshops, community mental health centers, home health providers, day treatment programs, group homes, waiver homes, adult family care homes, and within the community. Referrals involving hospital staff in an acute primary hospital and a law enforcement agency or correctional facilities are not appropriate for adult protective services. Referrals that fit this criteria is to be referred to the appropriate entity, such as, but not limited to, the hospital administrator, Quality Insights, Office of Health Facility Licensure and Certification, Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, in the agency's internal investigation office, prosecuting attorney, or chief law enforcement officer. Of course, a reporter is not required to know when and where Adult Protective Services has authority to investigate. All the reporter needs to know is to make a referral when abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation is suspected or observed, and centralized intake will determine if and when Adult Protective Services will investigate. So Adult Protective Services has the authority to have private, face-to-face interviews with the alleged victim, to have access to documents in a timely manner for the purposes of an investigation and protection of the alleged victim, to cooperate with and share information related to an APS case with others as deemed appropriate by West Virginia Code 963, and to provide the mandated reporter of the alleged maltreatment with basic information. Abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation. What it looks like. Warning signs of adult maltreatment include bruises, black eyes, whelps, lacerations or rope marks, untreated injuries in various stages of healing, laboratory findings of medication overdose or underutilization of prescribed drugs, the caregiver's refusal to allow visitors to see the individual alone, dehydration, malnutrition, untreated bed sores, and poor personal hygiene, unattended or untreated health problems, sudden changes in bank accounts or banking practices, including an unexplained withdrawal of large sums of money by a person accompanying the elder, sudden appearance of previously uninvolved relatives claiming their rights to the elder's property or possessions, unexplained sudden transfer of assets, and an individual's claim of being abused, neglected, or financially exploited. For a detailed list of warning signs of adult maltreatment, this slide, visit the Bureau for Children and Families Adult Protective Services website to access the PDF. You can open and print this form and post it in your area if you would like. Remember, these are just warning signs and do not include all possible warning signs. Adult Protective Services. Why it is needed. As a nation, our aging population is growing. In the year 1950, the world population aged 16 older was 205 million, which grew to 205 million by 2007. This number is expected to continue to reach a world total of 2 billion by the year 2050. The United States Census Bureau reported the population in the United States aged 16 older as 19.9%, which is roughly 61 million of the total population of 308 million in 2010. Researchers predict the United States aging population will increase by 102% by 2030. With the decrease in fertility rates and increase in life expectancy, the aging population continues to rise significantly. As a nation, the Elder Justice Initiative through the Department of Justice report elder abuse is dramatically underreported. Only 1 in 23 cases are actually reported to Adult Protective Services. Approximately 1 in 10 elder is abused each year. Abused elders are 3 times more likely to die than non-abused seniors, and abused elders are more likely to be placed in nursing homes than non-abused elders. World aging statistics in 1950 was 205 million to 705 million in 2007, and is expected to have a world population of 2 billion by 2050. In the United States, 61 million of the total population, which was 308 million, and is expected to increase by 102% in 2030. In West Virginia aging statistics, the total population aged 16 older was 359,482, which is roughly 19.4% of the total population, which is 1,853,001. adult maltreatment referrals in West Virginia. In 2016, Adult Protective Services received 14,777 investigations. They accepted and investigated 7,459 of those. In 2017, 15,602 referrals were received, and 7,264 were accepted and investigated. In 2018, a total of 20,175 referrals were received, and 306 referrals were accepted for investigation. Laws and policies will be drastically impacted in the years to come, but these changes, even if they happen now, will take time to develop and implement. With the aging population growing and a lack of appropriate resources, combined with burnout and compassion fatigue, our seniors are at an increased risk for their rights being violated. Rights such as dignity, quality of life, quality of care, and freedom from abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation, which are all protected under the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations 483, titled Requirements for States and Long-Term Care Facilities. Our state and our country's lack of funding for resources for adult protective services will be pushed past its limits. We need to be proactive in protecting our aging population by recognizing the signs and symptoms of abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation, and resources available. You can help prevent and protect those who are aged and disabled. Here are some national and state resources for your reference. The West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources, U.S. Department of Justice Elder Justice Initiative, West Virginia Aging and Disability Resource Network, Disability Rights of West Virginia, Legal Aid of West Virginia, and Senior Legal Aid of West Virginia, National Center on Elder Abuse, and National Adult Protective Services. For questions related to this presentation, please contact the Division of Children and Adult Services in the Bureau for Children and Families at 304-588-7980. Remember, though, to make a referral for child or adult abuse and neglect, call West Virginia's Centralized Intake